because I am angry, and I am here because the United States Congress can change all of this.
Hello everyone, I'm Alana Harkin and welcome to Roe v. Wade 2.0 by Margaret Vandenburg. Thank you for joining us for this virtual inaugural kickoff event, a benefit from which all the proceeds will be going to the Jackson Women's Health Organization in Mississippi, better known as the Pink House. In this play, Ms. Vandenburg lightly satirizes the oral transcript of Dobbs versus Jackson heard by the United States Supreme Court last December. Most of what you will hear tonight was actually said during oral arguments, and some of which was not, but it might have been. And what's going to surprise you is you probably won't be able to tell the difference, because those are the times we live in, a time when a Republican senator can take the floor of the US Senate and make a claim that women's eggs are the same as a sea turtle and deserve the same kind of protection. Yeah, that was sad, because apparently, breaking here, women descend from turtles. That's as logical as saying that the penis is endangered because the round island boa constrictor is. You know what? Scratch that last part, because I don't want anybody getting any ideas. The bad news is that Roe v. Wade is in grave danger, but the good news is that you can do something about it. And you're here tonight. And this play, beautifully written by Margaret Vandenburg, is going to get you fired up. If you would like to follow along with the script, please click the links provided for you in the description of this video, or go directly to the website and download the scripts from the menu tab. Tonight, you will hear a play that runs about 75 minutes with a 10-minute intermission, and then there will be a panel discussion. You are going to be steamed up during this panel discussion. You're going to want to get a drink, so take that time to go get one. Hey, I don't know what your vice is. It might be mint tea, and that's completely fine. This play comes to you with a theatrical rallying cry with wigs and whips, and I hear oven mitts. But most of all, it comes with a question: what do we do now? What do we do now that 5 Supreme Court justices have the power to take away your rights, to take away our rights, to take away human rights, to overturn Roe v. Wade? What do we do now? Thank you for listening, and please enjoy the play.
The Honorable, the Chief Justice and the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. Oyez, oyez, oyez. All persons having business before the Honorable, the Supreme Court of the United States, are admonished to draw near and give their attention, for the court is now sitting. God save the United States and this honorable court.
We will hear argument this morning in case 19-1392, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court. Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey hurt our country. They have no basis in the Constitution. They have no home in our history or traditions. They damage the democratic process. They choke compromise. They poison the court. For 50 years, they've kept this court at the center of a political battle it can never resolve. Roe and Casey have failed, but the people of Mississippi, if given the chance, will succeed. The Constitution places its trust in the people. On hard issue after hard issue, the people have made this country work. This court should overrule Roe and Casey and let Mississippians determine whether or not to protect unborn children's lives. I welcome the court's questions.
Counsel, I'd like to...
I want to be clear about what you're arguing and not arguing. As I understand it, you're arguing that the Constitution is silent and therefore neutral on the question of abortion. In other words, that the Constitution is not pro-life or pro-choice, but leaves the issue for the people of the states to resolve in the democratic process. Is that accurate?
Yes, Your Honor.
And so, even if you were to prevail, the states, many states, some states could continue to allow abortion. Is that correct?
That's consistent with our view, Justice Kavanaugh. It's one that allows all interests to have full voice. A little something for everyone.
A little something for everyone except pregnant women.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
Counsel, I'd like to
Mr. Stewart,
speak.
if I were to ask you which constitutional right protects access to abortion, is it privacy? Is it autonomy? What would it be?
Whichever one you're focusing on, Justice Thomas. Each of them is a step removed from the Constitution. Yes, the Constitution does protect certain aspects of privacy, of autonomy, and the like, but going directly from abstract concepts to specific rights isn't how this court traditionally does due process analysis.
Do you mean to say that privacy and autonomy are abstract?
No, Justice Sotomayor. I mean, in any case, abortion isn't mentioned in the Constitution.
The word woman isn't mentioned in the Constitution either. Does that mean?
Be that as it may, the crux of your case is whether or not Roe and Casey were wrongly decided, is it not? It's part of our stare decisis doctrine that precedence isn't an inexorable command and that there are circumstances in which overruling is possible, even desirable. Plessy versus Ferguson, for example, and Brown versus Board of Education, both of which righted egregious wrongs, did they not? But in thinking about stare decisis, whether or not precedents should stand, how should we evaluate precedents in such volatile cases? Casey explicitly takes into account public reaction to Roe versus Wade. Is that a factor you accept, or are you arguing that we should minimize that factor?
What I'd emphasize, Chief Justice Roberts, is that the people, many people really just want to have the matter returned to them so they can decide it locally. Deal with it the way they think best, depending on the dictates of their conscience. This is a hot, difficult issue for everyone, and the last 50 years have made things worse, not better. Roe is dividing the country.
All the more reason.
I assume you've read Roe pretty thoroughly.
Yes, Justice Breyer.
You claim that Roe versus Wade has politicized the court. It's a danger, I'll grant you that. But wouldn't overruling Roe also politicize the court? It's particularly important to show that we're not caving to social pressure, or political pressure for that matter. Well, not to mention the fact that new members of the court have tipped the balance of power in your favor.
Surely you don't mean that, Justice Breyer. There's no such thing as conservative and liberal justices, not on my watch anyway. We don't have Obama judges or Trump judges, Bush judges or Clinton judges. Our job is to call balls and strikes, not to pitch or bat or legislate from the bench.
God forbid.
What we have is an extraordinary group of dedicated judges doing their level best to be impartial.
Is that why Mitch McConnell blocked Merrick Garland?
Just because the legislative branch has gone the way of banana republics doesn't mean we have.
Prove it.
Are you threatening me?
Of course not. I'm challenging you to put your vote where your mouth is, to uphold Roe.
I'm not so sure this is such a good idea, airing our dirty laundry like this.
You'd prefer to shred the rule of law behind closed doors?
Standard practice. You know that as well as I do.
Not so fast. I'd like to read a few lines from Casey, if I may, to clarify what's at stake. To overrule the under fire in the absence of the most compelling reason to re-examine a watershed decision would subvert the court's legitimacy beyond any serious question. All right, what do you say to that?
Are you talking to me?
I'm talking to Mr. Stewart, unless you'd like to openly argue on behalf of the plaintiff.
No comment.
Well, what about you, Mr. Stewart? You're not worried about that overturning Roe versus Wade would undermine the court's legitimacy?
Not really. What I mean to say, in light of, we now have 50 years of evidence to see what Roe has done and what it hasn't done.
Well, it's caused some good things in the eyes of some people and some bad things in the eyes of others.
Let's call a spade, shall we? What hasn't been at issue for the last 50 years is a woman's right to choose, the right to control her own body. 30 justices over 50 years have reaffirmed this right. 4 have said no, 2 of them members of this court. But 30 justices have said yes, of varying political backgrounds. Now, the sponsors of this bill, the House bill in Mississippi, admit they're challenging Roe because we have new justices on the Supreme Court. Will this institution survive the stench this creates in the public perception that the Constitution and its reading are just political acts?
Needless to say, the Mississippi House bill never should have said that out loud.
The truth will out, Mr. Stewart. And I don't see how the legitimacy of the court can survive if people believe that everything, including Roe versus Wade, is politically motivated. I could name any other set of rights, including the Second Amendment, by the way. There are many political people who believe the court erred in saying that bearing arms is a personal right, as opposed to a militia right.
Don't be ridiculous.
You haven't answered my question, counsel.
Justice Sotomayor, I think the concern about appearing political makes it absolutely imperative that the court reach a decision well-grounded in the Constitution, in text, structure, history, and tradition, and that we carefully consider the stare decisis factors we've laid out.
Casey already went through every one of them, point by point.
No, it didn't, Your Honor, respectfully.
You think Casey's reasoning was wrong. That's your belief, but the Supreme Court has already rendered its decision.
Well, Your Honor.
And you haven't added.
Sorry, Your Honor.
Haven't added anything other than I disagree with Casey. Not a very compelling argument, Mr. Stewart.
Maybe I can highlight a problem or two. Casey doesn't account for 30 years of advancements in medicine, science, all those things.
What are the advancements in medicine you refer to, counsel?
I think it's an advancement in knowledge about fetal pain, things like that. We know that an unborn girl is fully human from a very early.
A gross minority of doctors believe fetal pain exists before viability, before a brain cortex is formed, in other words.
That's not what.
Pre-viability fetal pain is a belief, not a scientific fact.
But
how is your interest anything but a religious view? The issue of when life begins has been hotly debated by philosophers since the beginning of time. I gather it's still debated in religious circles. When do you believe a human life actually begins?
Your Honor, aside from,
Mr. Stewart, I know what Roe versus Wade said about viability, but was viability at issue in Casey?
I don't think it was squarely at issue in Casey, Your Honor.
Which means viability hasn't been litigated since Roe.
Exactly.
May I finish my inquiry?
Of course, Justice Sotomayor.
Virtually every state defines brain death as death, yet the literature is filled with episodes of people who are completely and utterly brain dead responding to stimuli. Clearly, a response by a fetus doesn't prove there's a sensation of pain, let alone consciousness. You haven't provided a shred of evidence that there's viability before 23 to 24 weeks.
What about fetal personhood, Your Honor? Roe versus Wade's core holding is that we can only protect an unborn girl's life after viability, when she can survive outside the womb, but not when she needs us most, pre-viability. That is not the world the Constitution promises.
Why do you keep referring to the fetus as a girl?
It's inclusive.
It's offensive.
Think of it as a kind of fetal feminism, protecting the rights of unborn Gloria Steinems.
Oh, that's rich coming from you.
You're never satisfied, are you? First you complain we exclude you. Now you're offended because we bend over backwards to include you.
Give them an inch, they'll take an L.
Now, let's not fight amongst ourselves. It's unseemly. One way or the other, the crux of the case is viability, isn't it?
Exactly. I've searched high and low for reference to anything remotely related to viability in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, in every single amendment to every single constitutional clause. Am I missing something?
That's the cornerstone of our case against Roe, Justice Thomas. Viability isn't tethered to anything in the Constitution, in history, or tradition. It's a quintessentially legislative line.
Counsel, there's so much that's not in the Constitution, including the idea that the Supreme Court has the last word on things like guns and abortion. And yet, what the court does on a day-to-day basis is render decisions based on the structure of the Constitution. Accordingly, we've recognized parents' rights to educate their children at home, to teach them the religion of their choice. We've recognized people's right to choose who they're going to marry. I fear none of those things are written in the Constitution. Why do you now say that somehow Roe and Casey are so unusual they must be overturned?
Well, Your Justice, I would emphasize.
Would a decision in your favor call into question any of the cases Justice Sotomayor just mentioned?
No, Justice Barrett.
What about Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell?
First of all, the vast majority of these cases have more clearly defined parameters. You can't ban contraception. You can't ban intimate romantic relationships between consenting adults. Can't ban same-sex marriage, none of which impinge on the rights of others the way Roe does.
What about Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado, the evangelical cake baker case?
With all due respect, Justice Breyer, surely queer wedding cakes are a bridge too far.
In other words, you're dissimulating when you say that overturning Roe wouldn't have an effect on those cases.
Heaven forbid.
That pretty much says it all.
Forgive me, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but I'm having trouble following your logic here. Where do you draw the line? Last time I checked, neither queer wedding cakes or gay marriage is explicitly mentioned in the Constitution. I'm not trying to argue we should overturn Obergefell, mind you, but do you really think that states like Mississippi and Texas and Florida aren't going to challenge these cases in court? We would be opening the floodgates, wouldn't we?
Your Honor, we'll always have a diversity of views, and people will vigorously debate and make decisions for themselves.
That's the point, isn't it? Making decisions for ourselves. When does the life of a woman enter into the calculus? Forcing women who are poor to give birth, and that's 75% of the population in Mississippi, puts them at 4 times greater risk of serious medical complications, if not death, than having an abortion before viability. And now the state is saying to these women, your bodies are not your own. Ha! The state has jurisdiction over you. Ha! The state intends to force you to bear a child. Ha! To compromise your ability to earn a living, temporarily, if not permanently. Ha! To put your life on the line, whether you like it or not, because we know better than you do.
Justice Sotomayor.
Chief Justice Roberts.
If I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. Whips aren't allowed in the courtroom.
And guns are?
Of course. They're in the Constitution, remember?
By which you mean we're a well-ordered militia?
Something like that.
Silly me. I thought we were here to safeguard against martial law, not enforce it.
You're quite right. Who needs guns when you've got a supermajority?
Is that a gun in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?
Little bit of both.
Order in the court. Well, we're almost out of time. I have just a few little, well, not little, I hope, questions. And the first gets back to the issue of viability. You know, in your petition for cert, your first question, and the only one on which we granted review, was whether all pre-viability prohibitions on elective abortions are unconstitutional. And then I think it's fair to say that when you got to the brief on the merits, you kind of shifted gears and talked about whether or not Roe and Casey should be overruled, not just modified. And I wanted to give you a chance to explain this shell game. Pardon me, this shift.
A couple of points, Your Honor. So at the petition stage, we emphasized that the court was going to need to reconsider, revisit, or reevaluate something or other. The merits, if I'm remembering correctly, if not the viability clause, take your pick. As to whether the court should overrule, take that momentous step, we've presented our best argument for that. That's what we've done, Mr. Chief Justice. I rest my case.
Thank you, counsel. Justice Thomas?
No further questions.
Justice Kavanaugh? Justice Breyer? Justice Sotomayor?
Why bother?
Thank you, counsel.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Ms. Rickleman?
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court. Mississippi's ban on abortion 2 months before viability is flatly unconstitutional under decades of precedent. Mississippi asks the court to dismantle this precedent and allow states to force women to remain pregnant and give birth against their will. The court should refuse to do so for at least 3 reasons. First, stare decisis presents an especially high bar here. In Casey, this court carefully examined and rejected every possible reason for overruling Roe, holding that a woman's right to end a pregnancy before viability was a rule of law and a component of liberty it could not renounce. Second, Casey and Roe were correct. For a state to take control of a woman's body and demand that she go through all the physical risks and life-altering consequences of pregnancy and childbirth is a fundamental deprivation of her liberty. Preserving a woman's right to make this decision until viability protects her liberty while logically balancing the other interests at stake. Third, eliminating or reducing the right to abortion will propel women backwards. 2 generations have now relied on this right, and 1 out of every 4 women makes the decision to end a pregnancy. To avoid profound damage to women's liberty, equality, and the rule of law, the court should affirm Roe versus Wade.
I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Mr. Stewart. I've searched high and low, Miss Rickleman. Spent sleepless nights poring over the sacred words of our divinely inspired slave-holding founding fathers, looking for textual evidence in support of your theory of the case. If we were interpreting the Second Amendment, I know exactly what we were talking about. If we were interpreting the Fourth Amendment, I'd know exactly what we're talking about because it's written. It's there. Now, what specifically are we talking about in Roe versus Wade? Is it liberty? Is it autonomy? Is it privacy? What is it?
It's liberty, Your Honor. It's the textual protection in the 14th Amendment that a state can't deprive a person of liberty without due process of law. Allowing a state to take control of a woman's body and forcing her to undergo the physical demands, risks, and life-altering consequences of pregnancy is a fundamental deprivation of her liberty.
Did any state constitutional provision recognize that abortion was a right, liberty, or immunity in 1868 when the 14th Amendment was adopted?
No, Your Honor, but there was a tradition under the common law for centuries of women being able to end their pregnancies. At the time of the founding and well into the 1800s, women freely exercised this right.
The brief for the American Historical Association says that abortion wasn't legal before quickening in 26 out of 37 states at the time when the 14th Amendment was adopted. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor, but those 26 states discarded the common law because of a discriminatory view that a woman's proper place was as a wife and a mother, a view the Constitution now rejects. Until 1860, even the Catholic Church allowed abortion before what they called insouling, their term for viability or quickening. That's why it's appropriate to historicize reproductive rights. Otherwise, the Constitution might reinforce historical discrimination against women.
And?
Is that a question, Justice Thomas?
It's the question, Miss Rickleman.
I'm afraid I don't understand.
All men are created equal, are they not?
It's the cornerstone of our founding documents.
Precisely. Now we're getting somewhere. Let's parse that phrase, shall we? All men are created equal. From an originalist perspective, the way the founding fathers themselves understood it, what do you suppose they meant by all men?
Let's not go there, Justice Thomas.
Why not? Miss Rickleman claims that the Constitution no longer reinforces historical discrimination against women, of all things. I'd like to give her an opportunity to defend her position.
I must confess, I don't see how this line of questioning relates to Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization.
I know.
You have a question, Justice Barrett?
That's why I'm here, to make sexist questions seem less offensive, let alone sexist rulings. I'm the Uncle Tom of jurisprudence pertaining to women. No offense, Justice Thomas.
Oh, none taken. It's a compliment coming from you.
Mrs. Rickleman, I take it you think women are entitled to the inalienable rights enjoyed by the all men referred to in All Men Are Created Equal?
Needless to say.
That being the case, why draw the line there? In the spirit of the never-ending quest to expand the purview of human rights, don't fetuses deserve the same consideration?
With all due respect, Your Honor, so-called fetal personhood isn't at issue in this case.
I'll be the judge of that. Do you have children Mrs. Rickelman?
I hardly think that's relevant.
Says who? Justice Sotomayor doesn't have children, you know. Neither does Justice Kagan, much to the detriment of their judgment, if you ask me. Have you been blessed with children?
2 girls.
Only 2? I've got 7 children, you know, 2 of whom are adopted, which leads me to my next question. Both Roe and Casey emphasize the consequences of forced parenting and the obligations of motherhood that flow from pregnancy. Why don't the safe haven laws take care of the problem? There is, without question, an infringement on bodily autonomy, not unlike vaccines, but that doesn't mean pregnancy and parenthood are all part of the same burden. Mr. Stewart's brief points out that in all 50 states, you can terminate parental rights by relinquishing a newborn. Leave the baby at a firehouse, for example, or a police station, not to mention adoption agencies. Why didn't you address the safe haven laws, and why don't they matter?
They don't matter for a number of reasons, Your Honor. The idea that a woman can place a child up for adoption has, of course, been true since Roe and Casey. So it's a consideration the court already addressed when it decided those cases and adhered to the viability line. Pregnancy imposes unique physical demands and risks on women, and in fact, has impact on their ability to care for other children, other family members, on their ability to work. And those risks are alarmingly high. It is 75 times more dangerous to give birth in Mississippi than it is to have a pre-viability abortion. And those risks are disproportionately threatening the lives of women of color. Finally, there's the emotional burden of forcing a woman to choose whether or not to give a child up for adoption.
That proves my point, not yours. How could any woman in her right mind resist the idea of wrapping these booties around the precious little toes of a newborn? You're a mother. Don't they tug at your heartstrings, Mrs. Rickelman?
Have you ever considered how rape and incest might affect a woman's heartstrings?
The Mississippi House bill doesn't take rape and incest into account, and neither should you. A soul is a soul, no matter how it was conceived.
So much for the separation of church and state.
Mrs. Rickelman was the one who brought up ensoulment, not me.
Ensoulment after viability, not before.
Aye, there's the rub. Let's return to the question at hand. Whether Mississippi has the right to prohibit abortions at 15 weeks rather than 23 or 24. A minor adjustment in the larger scheme of things, if you ask me. Not a total ban. Surely viability and choice aren't as closely linked as you say they are, Ms. Rickelman.
Before we shift gears, I'd like to follow up on something Justice Barrett said about vaccines and bodily integrity.
Very well. I'll allow it against my better judgment.
I hardly think that vaccines and abortions are comparable. Do you? I mean, with reference to bodily integrity, that is. Not to mention public health.
They're not comparable by any measurable standard, Your Honor. Pregnancy impacts a woman's bodily integrity for at least 9 months, even without serious medical complications. Vaccines, on the other hand, only take a minute and are minimally invasive.
Assuming they don't contain microchip tracking devices.
Or make your balls blow up like balloons, like Nicki Minaj's cousin's best friend.
Let's save questions about vaccines for next week when we consider whether or not to block the president's vaccine mandates.
Talk about a no-brainer.
Here again, you're not worried about the court's legitimacy? Telling women what to do with their bodies is fair game, apparently, but asking everyone else to take a life-saving vaccine is unlawful. Why? Because it infringes on their right to infect other people? You're not just telegraphing double standards, you're broadcasting them.
Don't be ridiculous. Fox News would never dream of broadcasting our double standards.
Oh, ball! We're here to interpret the Constitution, not pander to the press, let alone public opinion.
Even though the vast majority of Americans favor reproductive rights?
Especially because the majority of Americans favor reproductive rights. Who are they to decide what is or isn't ethical or legal?
But that was the crux of Mr. Stewart's argument, wasn't it? Letting the people of Mississippi decide whether or not to uphold Roe versus Wade. Somehow they're allowed to make ethical decisions, even though the majority of Americans aren't qualified to do so? Yet another double standard.
Hoisted by his own petard.
Need I remind you, I'm the Chief Justice. This is my court, and I'll be the judge of what is or isn't a double standard.
I love it when he gets all hot and bothered like that, don't you?
Preferably behind closed doors.
Ms. Rickleman, I read your brief, which states, somewhat inexplicably, that the only real option we have is to reaffirm Roe and Casey as they stand, or to overrule them in their entirety. You say that, quote, there are no half measures here, unquote. Is that a correct understanding of your brief?
Your Honor, we're responding to Mississippi's request to replace viability with a 15-week ban. As you well know, the viability line is the central holding in both Roe and Casey. Without it, there's no real way to uphold a woman's constitutional right to abortion. If the Mississippi House bill prevails, then states with 6-week bans, 8-week bans, 10-week bans, and so on would seek to enforce them without recourse to the scope of the liberty interest going forward. States will rush to ban abortion at virtually any point in pregnancy. It's a textbook definition of a slippery slope, Your Honor.
So much the better. By which I mean, this particular case is only asking for a 15-week ban. As far as viability goes, I don't see what that has to do with the question of choice at all.
With all due respect, Your Honor, people who need abortions after 15 weeks are often in the most challenging circumstances. They are often people with a major health or life change, a family illness, a job loss, separation, young people or people who are on contraception or pregnant for the first time or delayed in recognizing the signs of pregnancy, or poor women who often have much more trouble navigating access to care. And if they are denied the ability to make this decision because there's a ban after 10 weeks, they'll suffer all the consequences the court has talked about in the past. In fact, the data over the last 50 years has clearly shown that abortion has been critical to women's equal participation in society. It's been critical to their health, to their lives, to their ability to pursue.
I'm sorry, what kind of data is that?
I would refer the court to the brief of the economists in this case, which compiles data showing how the legalization of abortion has enhanced women's access to education and professional opportunities.
Well, putting data aside, if you think the issue is one of choice, the women should have a choice to terminate their pregnancies. Doesn't 15 weeks provide ample time to make that decision? Because viability doesn't have anything to do with choice, does it?
As the court has repeatedly emphasized, in Roe and Casey and June Medical, for example, the viability line has both a biological and a logical justification, marking the point when the fetus is capable of meaningful life.
Not so fast. That's a syllogism, not a justification.
A syllogism or tautology?
A syllogism, without a doubt, as follows. Premise. Viability marks the point at which a fetus can survive on its own. Premise. Abortion is legal until a fetus can survive on its own. Conclusion. Therefore, viability justifies the right to abortion. A logical fallacy if ever there was one.
A logical fallacy, to be sure, but a tautology, not a syllogism, as follows. The viability line is justified because the fetus is capable of meaningful life.
Strictly speaking, that's circular reason. Not a true tautology at all. If we're going to expose Miss Rickelman's logical fallacies, we need to be precise.
The clock is ticking. Gentlemen, while you're engaging in rhetorical pissing contests, women in Mississippi are faced with the grim prospect of terminating pregnancies without access to medical care. You can't really ban abortions, you know. You can only ban safe abortions. And only if you flout the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.
Are you arguing this case, Justice Sotomayor? Or should we let Ms. Rickelman represent the baby killers? I mean, the pro-choice side of the argument.
If I may, I'd like to address the question of viability once and for all. It's a clear and workable line that preserves the essential components of liberty and autonomy. And it has the advantage of being a rule of law for 50 years.
Yes and no. Now, the problem with your argument is that you're only accounting for one side of the equation. There are two interests at stake: the life of the mother and the life of the fetus. And one interest has to prevail over the other at any given point in time. In your brief, you say that the existing framework accommodates, that's your word, both the pregnant woman and the fetus. But according to Mr. Stewart's brief, you can't accommodate both interests, Ms. Rickelman. You have to pick. Core problem here is that you're forcing the court to pick sides on the most contentious social debate in American life. The Mississippi House bill argues that the Constitution is neutral on the question of abortion. And because the Constitution is neutral, this court should be scrupulously neutral, neither pro-choice nor pro-life, because we don't have the authority to rule one way or the other. So we should return to a position of neutrality and leave the question of abortion to the states, to the people of Mississippi. That's Mr. Stewart's argument in a nutshell, if I'm not mistaken. And I want to give you the chance to respond to it.
Yes, a few points, Your Honor. First, those very same arguments were made in Casey, and the court rejected them, saying that this philosophical disagreement can't be resolved in a way that women have no choice in the matter. And second, I don't think it would be a neutral position. The Constitution provides a guarantee of liberty, including the ability to make decisions related to childbearing, marriage, and family. Women have an equal right to liberty under the Constitution, Your Honor, and if they're not able to make this decision, if states take control of women's bodies and force them to endure months of pregnancy and childbirth, they will never have equal status under the Constitution.
I hardly think liberty and equality are interchangeable, Ms. Reichelman, as your argument seems to suggest, be that as it may. I'd like to ask a follow-up question about stare decisis, picking up on Justice Breyer's comments. And when you really dig into it, as I have, the history of stare decisis tells a somewhat different story than is sometimes assumed. And we all know that some of the most consequential cases in the court's history involved overruling precedent. Brown versus Board outlawed separate but equal. Baker versus Carr set the stage for one person, one vote. More recently, Lawrence versus Texas, which said that the state can't prohibit same-sex conduct. Gideon versus Wainwright, which is guaranteed the right to counsel in criminal cases. Obergefell, which recognized the constitutional right to same-sex marriage. I assume you agree with most, if not all, of these decisions, each of which overruled a precedent. So, question on stare decisis is why, if, and I know you disagree with what I'm about to say in the if we think that precedents are seriously wrong, then why doesn't the history of this court's practice require us to overrule them?
Because the view that a previous precedent was wrong has never been enough for this court to overrule, especially when there's 50 years of precedent. Instead, the court has required something else, a special justification. And Mississippi hasn't come forward with any special justification. They make the same exact arguments the court already considered and rejected in its stare decisis analysis in Casey. If this court renounces the liberty interests recognized in Roe and reaffirmed in Casey, it would be an unprecedented contradiction of individual rights and a stark departure from principles of stare decisis. In fact, the court has never revoked a right that is so fundamental to so many Americans and so central to their ability to participate fully and equally in society. Furthermore, the real world effects of overruling Roe and Casey would be severe and swift. Nearly half of the states are poised and ready to enact bans on abortion in all stages of pregnancy, many without exceptions for rape or incest. To borrow a line from Mr. Stewart's brief, this is not the world the Constitution promises.
You make a very forceful argument and identify critically important interests that are at stake in this issue. No doubt about that. Too bad we already made up our minds.
I must say I'm mystified by your position, Ms. Rickleman. Do you mean to say that a case can never be overruled on the grounds that it was egregiously wrong?
At the very least, the state would have to come forward with some kind of materially changed circumstances or some kind of materially new argument. And Mississippi hasn't done so in this case.
Really? Suppose Plessy versus Ferguson was re-argued in 1897, smack in the middle of Jim Crow. Would it not have been sufficient to say that it was an egregiously wrong decision from day one, the minute it was handed down, and should therefore be overruled?
Without a doubt, Plessy versus Ferguson was egregiously wrong on the day it was handed down, but the court was still required to provide a special justification. Had Brown versus Board of Education not exposed the hypocrisy of the separate but equal doctrine, Plessy wouldn't have been overturned, at least not yet.
Do you really?
And here, Mississippi hasn't.
You actually think there are no circumstances in which a decision may be overruled, properly overruled, when it must be overruled simply because it was egregiously wrong at the moment it was decided?
I think.
Is that correct?
Every other.
Is that your position?
Stare decisis factor likewise.
Yes or no, Miss Rickleman? Stop equivocating.
No. This court has never overruled solely based on a conclusion that a decision was wrong. If stare decisis is to mean anything, it has to mean that overruling precedent requires strict scrutiny of the original argument, a point-by-point analysis of precedent. Quite literally, the only way to ensure the rule of law going forward. Casey did that. It applied the stare decisis factors to Roe, which means what we're dealing with here is precedent on precedent. Doubly settled law.
Counsel, you keep emphasizing that the court drew the line at viability in Roe and reaffirmed it in Casey, and that's certainly something that we have to take into consideration. But suppose we were considering this question for the first time. I'm sure you know the arguments about the viability line as well as I do, probably better than I do. What would you say to the idea that the line really doesn't make any sense? That it is, as Chief Justice Roberts himself described it, arbitrary?
You're asking me to ignore stare decisis?
Sure. Why not?
Because as I already indicated, the stare decisis doctrine is the cornerstone of the rule of law.
Not if you're effectively hiding behind the doctrine, Mrs. Rickleman. Does this mean you can't defend the viability line in and of itself?
The court itself has consistently ruled that viability is a principled line, the most.
Yes, but we're fighting the hypothetical here, counsel. Accept the hypothetical. Surely, if a woman wants to be free from the burdens of pregnancy, that interest doesn't disappear the moment of the viability line is crossed. What is the secular philosophical argument for saying this is the appropriate line?
I hate to interrupt. I really do. But I can't help but think that the word secular is a telltale sign we've wandered into dangerous territory. Where the religious view has somehow wormed its way into our deliberations. Could this possibly be true?
Heaven forbid.
That's the second time you said that. Yet another tell.
And that's the second time you've said you hate to interrupt. A ridiculous assertion given your tendency to pontificate.
My tendency to pontificate.
Pontificating goes with the territory, gentlemen. What doesn't go with the territory is this public display of discord, this infighting. I won't allow it. As Justice Breyer is wont to say, the court's legitimacy relies on the appearance of collegiality and, if not, unanimity.
I never said that.
We're all one big happy family, remember? Doctrinal differences notwithstanding. Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia frequently accompanied one another to the opera. Justice Scalia taught Justice Kagan how to shoot a gun, if you can believe it. They even went hunting together. Isn't that right, Justice Kagan?
You may have noticed that two of those justices are no longer with us. The collegiality of the court may not have survived Justice Ginsburg's passing, for obvious reasons.
I do wish you'd make more of an effort to get along.
To play nicely with the other children?
Something like that. Decorum is essential to the reputation of the Roberts Court.
Roberts Court or the Thomas Court?
6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
I beg your pardon.
Nothing. Getting back to the task at hand. Does the viability line really hold up under strict scrutiny, given the philosophical questions posed by fetal personhood?
With all due respect, no one will ever be able to answer those questions. No one in this court. Anyway, philosophy, secular or otherwise, is the purview of philosophers, not justices, who are charged with interpreting the Constitution, not speculating on the meaning and origin of life. Viability is the most principled, workable line because it balances all the interests at stake, including the fetus's ability to survive separately without requiring the court to resolve unresolvable philosophical debates.
Which leads us back to the question of stare decisis.
Talk about beating a dead horse.
I'd like to read from Casey again, if I may. As you well know, the majority opinion is written into two parts. The part one reaffirms Roe versus Wade. The second part enumerates the stare decisis principles that clinch the case. In light of this due diligence, and I quote, only the most convincing justification can show that a later decision overruling Roe is anything but a surrender to the political pressures of the new members of the court, unquote. New members, mind you, their words, not mine. The last sentence of Casey also warns that overruling Roe versus Wade would undermine our ability to function as the Supreme Court of a nation dedicated to the rule of law. They didn't refer to this outcome as a stench, Justice Sotomayor's characterization of the case, if only because the Berger Court was more collegial than the Roberts Court. Mr. Stewart has assured us that we need not worry about the damaging the Supreme Court's legitimacy. What do you think, Ms. Rickleman? Have you reflected on the larger implications of this case, above and beyond the question of whether a 15-week ban really effectively guts Roe?
It's not my place to tell the court how to conduct itself. I'm here to uphold the rule of law, and the rule of law demands that the court reaffirm the rights of women, which have been justified beyond a shadow of a doubt in Roe and Casey.
No one should have to tell the court how to conduct itself, yet here we are, on the brink of what amounts to a constitutional crisis. It's not enough that the executive and legislative branches of our government are imploding. Are we really going to follow suit? Rereading Casey, I'm struck by its assessment of the historical significance of Roe versus Wade. It says Roe is special. What's special about it? It calls it a watershed case. Why? Because the country is divided? Because feelings run high? And yet the country, for better or for worse, decided to resolve their differences by this court laying down a constitutional principle, in this case, a woman's right to control her own body. In watershed cases such as this, it's particularly important to show that we're not a political institution whose rulings swing back and forth depending on what part of the public yells loudest. It's what Hamilton meant when he said that we wield neither the sword nor the purse, that our legitimacy relies on the people's belief that we aren't just politicians in robes, dressing up partisan politics in the guise of legal proceedings. Judging from the tenor of oral arguments thus far, I fear we're in danger of jeopardizing our authority, if not our legitimacy.
Enough already. How do you think I feel? It's my court. And if you think I want to go down in history as the Chief Justice who allowed blatant partisan politics to run rampant, you've got another thing coming. When it comes to the High Court, the art of the deal requires an invisible hand steering our rulings in an ultra-conservative direction without sinking the ship of state. This isn't the first court to try to make the contraction of rights look like fidelity to the Constitution. But the times, they are a-changin'. Try as we might, we can't ignore the woeful fact that the majority of we, the people, are moving in one direction, toward an expansion of equality, while my court desperately tries to turn back the clock to make America great again, to borrow a phrase, otherwise known as owning the libs. We need to proceed incrementally, privileging religious liberties without appearing to violate the separation of church and state, advancing the interests of heteronormative rich white men without appearing to marginalize Black, brown, indigenous, queer, and other appropriately disenfranchised groups who aren't up to the task of governing themselves. The operative word is appearance, a simulacrum of justice, not unlike the Statue of Liberty, which seems to welcome the huddled masses, even as the United States slams its borders shut to safeguard the white supremacy that made America great in the first place.
Stop. I'm getting all hot and bothered just thinking about heteronormative white supremacists.
Fellow conservatives, lend me your ear. Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health is an ingenious bill, tailor-made to gut Roe while maintaining the illusion of choice, but only if we allow the 15-week ban to stand, at least for now, to cover our tracks. A wolf in sheep's clothing comes to mind, an apt metaphor for the Roberts Court, if I must say so myself. Don't get me wrong. I want to throw Roe on the ash heap of history as much as you do, though I would never say it out loud.
You just did.
I just did what?
You said it out loud.
Oops. What I meant to say, of course, is that we would never dream of overruling Roe without making sure every last stare decisis consideration is subjected to strict scrutiny. A double, triple, quadruple level of judicial review designed in part to safeguard the reputation of this august institution.
Why bother? Nobody's really paying attention anyway, except maybe a handful of feminazis. The majority of Americans are too busy fighting over COVID vaccines and whether or not the January 6th assault on the Capitol was heroic or not. Besides, who needs judicial review when we've got Fox News on our side?
Not to mention the fact that Justice Ginsburg is gone, finally, and we can do as we please.
The changing of the guard, so to speak, ushering in a whole new era of not so compassionate conservatism. Justice Ginsburg must be rolling in her grave.
One can only hope.
Ding dong, the witch is dead. Witch, oh witch, the wicked witch. Ding dong, the wicked witch is dead. Ding dong, the merry-o. Sing it high, sing it low. Let them know the wicked witch is dead.
Order in the court. Let's see now. Where were we?
I'd like to underscore the number of times members of this court have declared that Roe versus Wade is settled law and that viability is...
You've made that point abundantly clear, Ms. Rickleman, for what it's worth.
Any further questions?
Enough already.
Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Breyer, Justice Sotomayor.
No further questions.
Thank you, counsel.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
The case is hereby submitted for review at 11:54 a.m. December 1st, 2021.
A date which will live in infamy.
The beginning of the end of democracy.
Over my dead body. Did you miss me? When the cat's away, the mice will play, that's for sure. Who knew you could make so much mischief in the brief span of time since my untimely demise? Mind you, I'm well aware that people say I should have retired earlier, by which they mean I'm responsible for the conservative supermajority on the court. You mustn't think we can't hear you up on Mount Olympus. The acoustics are amazing up there. I'd like to set the record straight once and for all. Don't blame me for the fact that Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton, that Mitch McConnell cares more about demagoguery than democracy, let alone the fact that Justice Barrett isn't so much a rhino, a Republican in name only, as a wino, a woman in name only.
Did someone say wino? Cheers.
As for you, the frat boy occupying the Honorable Justice Kennedy's seat, do you have any idea how much damage you've already done to this institution? I fault myself in a way for letting it happen. Now that I've got a little distance from it all, death has a way of cutting through all the bullshit. I can acknowledge the mistakes we made, welcoming you with open arms when we should have called a stench, to quote Justice Sotomayor. And that's not all. We let this pomp and circumstance go to our heads. All the power we wield due in part to the dereliction of the other two branches of government, who dump all their dysfunction at our doorstep. That's no excuse, mind you. I'm well aware of my own narcissistic tendencies, leaning into my rock star status instead of discouraging it, making a video of my workout in the courthouse gym of all things, basking in my 15 minutes of fame like an elderly Kardashian. Notorious RBG, my ass. Not to mention holding on to my seat well past my expiration date. It's a cautionary tale, Justice Breyer. Make way for the next generation already. It all boils down to one of the 7 deadly sins, pride. Flattering myself that I was somehow irreplaceable, that only I could save the day, even now, descending from the heavens to beat back the rising tide of testosterone on the court. I hate to tell you in particular, Justice Kavanaugh, given your dangerously fragile ego, but you're just another judge, no more, no less, pretending to be supreme, pretending to have some kind of divine right, a relic of the monarchy we rebelled against. And this is what kills us as an institution, this pretense that we're above partisan politics, which obscures the fact that we're just as prone to corruption as the other two branches of government. All the more dangerous because there are no checks and balances on the Supreme Court, whose unelected members serve for life, whose confirmation hearings are performative at best, sideshows at worst. Just to ask Justices Thomas and Kavanaugh, which reminds me, now that I'm no longer bound by the court's insidious civility, yet another vector of hypocrisy, I'd like to pose a question I've been dying to ask you two. Did you do it?
I beg your pardon.
You'd be better off begging the pardon of Anita Hill and Christine Blasey Ford. Fess up. Did you do it?
I did not have sex with that woman.
Ha ha ha! The Clinton defense. Tried and true and guaranteed to telegraph the unimpeachable integrity of men in power, lack of integrity notwithstanding. After all, boys will be boys.
I'll drink to that.
Cheers.
And that's what this is all about, isn't it? Boys being boys. You have your way with us in every conceivable way, and then you leave us holding the bag, or the fetus, as the case may be, which you dare to call a person, while denying us our right to personhood. An embryo endowed with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What next? Fetal 401ks? I thought I could leave it in your hands, Justice Sotomayor, to carry the torch of justice in the face of the tyranny of testosterone. But relying on heroic measures won't address the fact that this court is rotten to the core. Any institution that pretends to be infallible is bound to abuse its power. Have we learned nothing from 2 millennia of papal malfeasance? Speaking of which, what's with all the Catholics on the bench? Republicans are yelling and screaming about Democrats threatening to pack the court, but it's already been packed with papists whose raison d'etre is overruling Roe. Congratulations, the moment you've been waiting for has finally arrived. The pièce de résistance of judicial activism, the swan song of democracy, overturning Roe versus Wade, the ultimate expression of what all men are created equal has meant all along. You know me. I'd like to believe that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. If this turns out to be true, it will be in spite of, not because of the Supreme Court, whose name alone disqualifies it as an agent of equality. We'd be better off calling it the People's Court.
That's a television show.
And this is a circus. Take your pick. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll do what I came here to do.
Fasten your seatbelts, gentlemen.
Like I said, I'm not here to save the day. I just left my purse behind my former seat on the bench, the one currently occupied by a gagged dummy of the female persuasion. A little on the nose, don't you think? I'm tempted to impart one last pearl of wisdom. Having pontificated for so many years, perched up there on my high horse, it's difficult to break the habit. We all remember the apocryphal story of Benjamin Franklin's description of the Constitutional Convention in 1787. When asked what kind of government the delegates had devised, he replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." Listening to the proceedings of your court, Chief Justice Roberts, I'm afraid Franklin's admonition is too high-minded to meet the moment. A gangster version is much more appropriate. given your indifference to the rule of law. Nice little democracy you got here. Be a shame if something happens to it. No need to call the sergeant at arms, Chief. I'll see myself out.
Talk about a showstopper.
Nonsense. The demise of democracy doesn't mean the end of the conservative agenda. If anything, it enhances our authority. Nothing can stop us now. At long last, the city on the hill is nigh.
America as God intended it.
A theocracy of the chosen few.
The beginning of the end of democracy as we know it. Talk about an inside job. Was it Abraham Lincoln who said that the real threat to our freedoms will not come from the outside, but from within? Suppose I could always resign in protest. A lot of good it would do. Mitch McConnell would just block President Biden's nomination, and another Federalist Society judge would be elevated to the court. I'll be damned if I'm going down without a fight. If the arc of the moral universe doesn't bend toward justice, it is on us, people. We, the people.
Oyez, oyez, oyez. All persons having business before the Honorable, the Infallible, the Supreme Court of the United States are admonished to draw near and give their attention, for the court is now sitting. God save the United States and this honorable court.
We will hear argument this afternoon in case 19-1393, Christian Soldiers Incorporated versus What's Left of the Rule of Law.
So greetings, I'm your moderator, Madeline McCrae. Our panel this evening is meant to be a kind of activist brainstorming session, a way to inform us about what each of us can do to support reproductive rights now that the Supreme Court is poised to overrule Roe v. Wade. Now, in a moment, I'll introduce you to our distinguished panelists. But first, let's talk about how we got here and what's at stake. From a legal perspective, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization sits on top of a slippery slope, unfortunately. I'm sure it's safe to say that grassroots activists like Amy Arambidi and Max Carwile were already operating in an almost post-Roe world, if you will, what it's like to be on the front lines of abortion access in states like Texas and Tennessee, and how things have changed over the last few years since abortion has become increasingly targeted in our culture wars, in our country's culture wars in particular. But first, it's my honor to introduce our distinguished panelists who've been on the front lines fighting the good fight all along. Amy Arambidi was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas. She was inspired to go into reproductive health rights and justice by her father, who was an abortion provider in Central and South Texas. She studied philosophy at the University of Texas and received her Juris Doctor from New York Law School. She co-wrote the Public Leadership Institute's playbook for abortion rights, serves on the board of Equality Texas, serves on the advisory council of Repro Action, and is a We Testify storyteller. She was an intern at Avow in 2006 and 2007, the political affairs director in 2013 and 2014, and joined as the executive director in 2018. Welcome, Amy. Max Carwile, she, her, is the director of programs at Abortion Access Front. She is a born and raised East Tennessean who currently resides in Knoxville. In many different forms, she has been working to decrease abortion stigma and increase abortion access since her own abortion at age 17. She is a founder of the Tennessee Stories Project, an abortion storytelling campaign, and Mountain Access Brigade, an abortion fund. At AAF, she supports and highlights the work of independent clinics, builds programming such as Operation Save Abortion, and works to expose fake clinics. Very important. Thank you, and for being with us. David S. Cohen is the author of Living in the Crosshairs, The Untold Stories of Anti-Abortion Terrorism and Obstacles Course, The Everyday Struggle to Get an Abortion in America. A professor in the School of Law at Drexel University, he is the recipient of the 2015 Center for Reproductive Rights Innovation in Scholarship Award and the 2016 Person of the Year Award from the Abortion Care Network. He is also as a fellow and staff attorney for the Women's Law Project in Philadelphia, where he handled cases involving reproductive rights, sex discrimination, and health care for women prisoners and family rights for gay and lesbian couples. On behalf of everyone listening, thank you so much for your important work and for joining us for this crucial conversation. So David, Tag, you're it. Can you talk about how the Dobbs versus Jackson's women's health decision might affect things like contraception, marriage equality, and other at-risk rights? In other words, what's at stake?
With the draft opinion that was released now a couple weeks ago, if it remains anything, if the actual opinion remains anything like what we saw already, I think all of the things you just mentioned are at risk. The constitutional protection for abortion is grounded in the same legal principle, privacy, as the right to marriage, the right to contraception, the right to sexual privacy. And some of the court's greatest precedent is at risk if the court goes down the path that it looks like it's going. Now, the draft opinion that we saw, Justice Alito tried to say, but abortion is different. But it really rings hollow to say that, because the reasoning that led up to that just proclamation that abortion is different, the reasoning really would attack the underlying principles around the protections for marriage and contraception. So even though on the one hand, he is saying abortion is different, on the other hand, it's very clear that the reasoning that he's putting forth in this draft opinion could knock down the precedents around contraception, marriage, and other forms of privacy. And we know that there's a very concerted, conservative legal movement just chomping at the bit to use this opinion and take it as far as they possibly can. So it's scary. I hope it's not what we see when the decision is actually comes out, but if it is, it's really scary.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Everything that you said, obviously, I've even seen where there's a risk or there are some bill proposals out there about banning interracial marriage, which is really crazy as well. Thank you for that. Before moving on to what we can do to stop the reactionary conservative agenda, follow-up question for you, David. Your scholarship explores the intersection of constitutional law and gender, as well as how masculinity figures into the political and cultural landscape. Could you please talk about the way masculinity and male privilege figure into the law and how gender informs constitutional law?
I mean, that's a big question. I'll try and cabin it to Dobbs and what we're seeing. I think that it is, it's quite noteworthy that the way that Justice Alito writes his opinion, he's saying we have to look to history and tradition to find a right to abortion. The history and tradition he's looking at is history and tradition of men, written by men, reasoned by men, laws passed by men. I mean, he's looking to a period of time, the 1700s, the 1800s, when men controlled society, obviously much more than they do now. And to the exclusion of men of color, to the exclusion of women of any race. And at a time in American history when married women were literally the property of their husbands, their legal identity through a doctrine called coverture, which a lot of people have never heard of, their legal identity literally disappeared upon marriage. They were not separate people. And this is the time period that Justice Alito is looking to determine whether the Constitution protects abortion rights. So of course he's not going to find any protection because the laws were written by men for men to oppress other people who were not white men. And so this is sort of an opinion, and if it comes out the way it's looking, this is an opinion that is promoting a certain type of dominant masculinity and male culture, white male culture. And so, of course, it's going to find that abortion is not a protected right. And so this is a way for the law to look backwards rather than forwards, to look at who in the past has always been a part, accepted as part of who writes the laws and who determines the laws, and not look to our more egalitarian society we have now. Not that we're perfect now, but we're certainly better than we were 150 years ago, to the period that he was looking at. So it's really just, we've got a man writing an opinion about men oppressing people who are not in the dominant class.
Yeah, pretty scary, for sure. Thank you for that response. And I know it was a big question. It's truly a big question, but you did, gave us what we needed to know. We're going to turn our attention to Max Carwow's recent email about what individuals can do to help abortion access in their communities. Specifically, how do groups like the Abortion Access Front expect things to change in the wake of the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs v. Jackson's Women's Health Organization? This question is for Amy as well, regarding how will groups like Repro Action and Avow respond to the crisis. But we'll start with you, Max.
Yeah, it's really important to note that a lot of groups have been preparing for this for several years. There are many states in the country where it does already feel like Roe is gone, where people already do have to travel several hours to get an abortion and jump through so many hurdles. I mean, here in Tennessee, every time I list all of our abortion restrictions, people act like I'm making it up. They're like, there's no way that can be true. So for many people, this has already been a lived reality. And that's where especially abortion funds and practical support organizations have been preparing, have been building networks around how do we get people to care? How do we make sure people know about all of their options to be as not only medically, but legally safe as possible? So right now it's critically important that people follow the lead of these organizations, of abortion funds in particular, and grassroots organizations that have been doing local and state level work to look at what the needs are in their community and prepare for those. And that's a lot of what Abortion Access Front wants to do, is be a connector between these movements. We know that every time there is a terrifying national action, like a Supreme Court decision, there's a whole wave of inspired and invigorated new activists who want to get involved and don't know how. And sometimes when you only hear about one national organization, you look to get involved and they're like, this is great. Call this federal legislator who hates you, be on our email list. Maybe there'll be something else to do. We want to make sure that people know about all the different ways they can get involved in their community on a city level, on a state level, or even virtually with great programs like Plan C's Ambassadors of Information program. So that's what we're focusing on right now, is there's the very real threat of Roe v. Wade falling. And then once that happens, what do we do? How do we come together? Because this is how we will survive this time, is by coming together as a community and taking care of each other. We need to all feel that it is our individual responsibility to take care of our community and not wait for the government or national organizations to take care of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Yes. Amy.
Sure. I want to echo a lot of what Max just said. I think it's important to do a few things. One is to support abortion funds. Those are organizations who provide resources to people seeking abortion, whether for the actual procedure or for the logistical needs that they have, like travel, accommodations. And you can do that at nnaf.org. The other thing I would do is support independent abortion clinics by donating or sharing keepourclinics.org. And I think a lot of people assume that the majority of abortions happen at a Planned Parenthood, but they don't. They happen at independent clinics. So that's something that I would just encourage people to share so that they can find the clinics near them. There are a lot of resources called I Need an A and an Abortion Finder that can put people in contact with or provide the information of the most local abortion provider that's providing care now. In Texas, for Texans, needabortion.org kind of does the same thing. We've synthesized all the information of abortion funds and abortion clinics. So I think spreading those kind of resources is really important, especially as there's a lot of confusion with all these bans, like, popping up all across the country. People don't know what their rights are, and they don't necessarily pay attention to abortion rights until they need one. So I think sharing accurate information, especially in light of crisis pregnancy centers, fake clinics, and other misinformation campaigns that are around. The other thing I would say is one of the things that I think is essential is to talk out loud about why we support abortion care. I think one of the mistakes we've made over the past 49 years is that first, we allowed abortion to become so stigmatized that people can't even say the word. We have to talk about why we support abortion, why it's necessary for our communities, why we support anyone who has an abortion, and just talk about it. At Avow, we have a Let's Talk About Abortion training where we can, provide a virtual training or an in-person training and just get you comfortable with talking about abortion. Abortion, is a procedure that 1 in 4 people who can get pregnant will have, but we don't talk about it. We don't use the word, and there's so much stigma surrounding it. That's how misinformation and lies grow. So that's the other thing I would recommend. The other thing is always demand of the people that are running for office to tell you how they're gonna protect and expand access to abortion rights. It's not enough to be pro-choice. Most people don't have a choice in this country, especially now. So we have to demand of them that they do something, they take action, they make sure that laws protect the access and not hinder it and not ban it, which is what is happening all over the country. So I think those are a few things of where I would get started. The last thing is sharing information about self-managed abortion that's accurate. I think there's a lot of rhetoric that talks about safe, legal, and rare. The thing is, abortion is one of the safest procedures, and medication abortion is one of the safest medications. And we need to provide information so that people understand that. I think one of the biggest obstacles will be that abortion may not be legal, but it's definitely safe. And we need to share that information, like the World Health Organization's information and other organizations that Max spoke of. But those are a few things I think people can do now to kind of help along the movement.
Excellent. Yeah, I've been, obviously, if you're all familiar with the fact that here in New York, the governor has, said that New York is going to be a safe place for women to travel. This isn't in the script. I'm just making a comment here. And I just saw that they're trying to ban that, make it illegal for women to travel from their own home state, Tennessee, Texas, wherever, and so that they can't even leave, and come to somewhere where it is safe, where they'll be funded, by the way, to make that journey. So it's really medieval. Forgive me, I didn't mean to just chime in there, but it is. It's medieval. My God. So no doubt you're all acquainted with the playbook for abortion rights that's co-written by Amy in collaboration with the Public Leadership Institute. Now, I wonder if all of our panelists could speak about resources such as Playbook, and you touched on that a little bit, I think, just now, Amy, but it bears repeating, places where our audience members can find out how to become activists and advocates for reproductive rights.
Yeah, I can kick us off real quick. One thing that Abortion Access Front is working on is a day-long virtual training on Sunday, July 17th called Operation Save Abortion, because we want to give it a little bit of time. We are expecting the Supreme Court decision by then. So hopefully by July 17th, we will have an idea of what specifically is everything going to look like state by state, clinic by clinic. So it can be a day-long training where people can find their place in the movement, talking about supporting independent clinics and clinic escorting, talking about abortion funds, how to fundraise for them, how to volunteer, what abortion doulas look like, how to destigmatize abortion, share your story, how to get involved in state and local level advocacy, and how to have your voice be heard. Marches are great, and there are so many other tools for direct action and being visible and loud. So we are hosting a day-long training that people can register for now at operationsaveabortion.com. So that is at least one resource, because I know part of the obstacle with getting involved is that there's a lot of change and it's hard for everything to be listed in one place. So that is one thing we are working on. And the National Network of Abortion Funds, like Amy mentioned, is another great resource for figuring out abortion funds to donate to volunteer for, and to host your own fundraisers for. I think sometimes people think they don't have the power to host an event. They're waiting to attend something. And you could just host an event with your friends and get everyone to donate money to your local abortion fund. So when you go to abortionfunds.org, you can see the list, you can find what's in your area. And the other websites mentioned, like I Need an A, can also be helpful finding clinics in your area to see if they need volunteers, clinic escorts, keeping patients safe, anything like that.
Awesome, awesome. Amy, did you want to chime in there too?
A few other organizations that I would just add to Max, although Max was very thorough in her providing of resources, is If, When, How and the Repro Legal Defense Fund. I don't know, I'm sure everyone has heard the news about Lizelle Herrera from a couple of weeks ago, where a Texan was arrested and eventually let go, but charged essentially for having an abortion. And we expect that this might happen more and more as bans go into effect and rogue DAs, try to assert their, extreme opinions and disregard the law. So I would just encourage people to check out the website If, When, How and Repro Legal Defense Fund, because I think it's important to know where you can get legal support as well in this time when bans are spreading across the country and people are becoming emboldened to either civilly sue or prosecute, and it's just kind of a scary time. So
yeah, I would agree, definitely. I think we all do. So David, since you serve on the board of the National Abortion Care Network, could you speak to how access to reproductive health care will change in the wake of the Supreme Court's impending decision to overrule Roe v. Wade? And you may have
Sure.
mentioned a little bit of this in the beginning, but if you would just expand on it.
Yeah, so absolutely. But I just want to add one more resource. There's a wonderful website called Plan C, which has, Amy talked about abortion medication and pills earlier. Plan C has all the information you could possibly want about abortion pills, how to take them, how to use them, where to find them. You can find a map of the country and plug in whatever state you're in. It'll give you all the options for abortion pills in your state, even in states where it's restricted. And so it's a really wonderful, thorough, reliable source of information around pills. It's not the only one online that has that, but it's a really great, well-designed, comprehensive website about it. And I think one of the things we're going to see going forward is, just like we have fake brick and mortar clinics, there's going to be a lot of bad information about abortion pills online, fake abortion pill websites by the antis, because they will stop at nothing. So knowing where to get this information reliably and to get safe pills, Plan C is the place to go. So I think people really need to know about that. But in terms of how the landscape of abortion access is going to change if the decision comes out the way we expect, based on the leak, the best estimates are that roughly half of the states in the country in the very near future will have complete bans or serious restrictions, making it very difficult for most people to get abortions. In the other half of the states, it will range from a state like where I am, Pennsylvania, where at least for now, it looks like it will remain legal, but it will still be heavily restricted, to states that, as you mentioned, New York, trying to become a sanctuary state where people can safely go to New York with all of the support that hopefully a government can give to patients and providers and helpers. So we're going to see a very divided country, and we could see this very quickly. So patients are going to be left in a situation, or people who want to get an abortion are going to be left in a situation, if they are in a state where it is banned, really three different options. They are going to either be able to travel or travel to a state where abortion is legal. And like you said, there's talk about making that illegal or restricted. We haven't seen that happen yet, but there have been proposals. And I do expect some states to try that. But in the meantime, while it's legal, travel is something that is very much a privilege. Travel is a privilege because you need money, you need a car, you need gas, you need a supportive network of people who can take care of your kids when you leave for a day or three or more. You need a job that is flexible enough that you can take time off for this. You need to be comfortable that you are not going to be pulled over by the police while driving and harassed, or at an immigration checkpoint in parts of the country where they have those. So travel is something for the privileged. Now, that being said, a lot of people will travel, and we will see in particularly states like Illinois, Colorado, New Mexico, maybe North Carolina if abortion remains legal there. We are going to see huge influx, and in my state, Western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, we're going to see huge influxes of patients to those locations, which is going to strain the clinics that exist in those locations because they are taking care of the patients who they always take care of, plus all the travelers. So we have seen an increase, new clinics, particularly in Southern Illinois, because there's a need, that a huge, that's going to be probably the biggest hub in the country. If there is travel. But so travel is going to be a big part of the national landscape. But for people who can't travel, they're going to have to resort to finding a way to get an abortion other than legal traveling to a state where it's legal. And that could hopefully be, if they are early enough in pregnancy, abortion pills through Plan C or another option that will have information for them. Now, this could put them or people they help them at some kind of legal risk, particularly if they are people who are more likely to be surveilled or considered suspicious in this country, so poor people and people of color. But that will be a safe way to access abortion for those who can. Some other people may try to get an abortion through other means, not pills. And there are still home remedies and people who have, home procedures with higher risks presented from those things. And then the third bucket of people is people who are just going to carry to term because they are going to have no option. And the estimates right now that I've seen estimates that range from 75,000 to 170,000 people a year who would otherwise get abortions are now going to carry their pregnancies to term, with all of the physical health, mental health risks that come from pregnancy and birth. And then all of the, things that happen to someone's life after birth in terms of physical risks, mental health risks to their children that they already have, to their career aspirations, more likely to stay with an abusive partner. The list goes on in terms of the negative effects to someone's life if they carry a pregnancy to term and then give birth and then have a child that they did not plan or want, and they wanted to have an abortion. So that's sort of what's going to happen. And I think that really people don't fully comprehend the public health crisis that is coming in this country, concentrated in the South and the Midwest, and concentrated for poor people and people of color, that we are about to see if the decision comes down the way we expect.
Yeah,
that was really depressing, and I'm sorry, but
because it was depressing, I want to jump in. Yes, if you're watching this and that freaked you out on an individual level, real quick, a few things to know. If you are hearing this and freaking out about what if you get pregnant, a few things. One, people tracking their periods, understanding their cycle is going to become critically important so that people can find out they're pregnant as soon as possible if they don't want to continue a pregnancy. Because if somebody wanted to order pills on the internet, They need to act very early in the pregnancy, and as well as thinking about waiting for shipping. Or if somebody wants to travel to another state, there will be several weeks waiting to be able to get into a clinic in one of these hotspot states. So finding out that someone is pregnant as early as possible is going to become critically important. And I've been seeing online a lot of concern and panic around the period tracking apps and what they do with your data. So a few things to help people with that panic. One, there's a great app called Yuki, EUKI, that does not store anyone's data, that can be used as a period tracking app, as well as information on abortion, other forms of contraception. It is a great tool for if you are concerned about what could be done with your data or used against you. Using an app that does not store your data is a great option. A secondary option, if Yuki doesn't feel like the right fit for you, there's an app called Clue that, because they're based in Germany, does not have to follow US laws or hand over data, and does take these privacy concerns seriously. So that is another option, but it's important when using apps like that to make sure the data in your app isn't linked to any other app. Like, don't allow it to sync with Apple Health or anything like that. I know this feels very in the weeds, but this is the kind of thing that we need to be thinking about and getting this education to people, as well as if somebody does want to talk about self-managed abortion, help a friend with it, download the texting app Signal, text your friends on there. Think about your data and privacy. We are very lucky in that we have more resources than we did prior to Roe v. Wade. Abortion doesn't have to look like coat hangers or anything like that anymore. We have new symbols, a new way forward. And that means we also have new concerns around data and tracking. So this is right now, if you're looking for what to do some research, learn about cybersecurity, and learn how to educate your friends.
That's amazing information. And, you know, thank goodness that we have this modern technology. I want to encourage, as a person who is quite old school, if you will, please be your own app as well. Be your own best app. We have calendars, okay? If you have a phone, set up your own time, an alert on your own phone, or write it down somewhere that you can just simply be more aware of that you may be running late, because we all know that these apps are at any point in time can be taken down by government, and so you lose those. So I just like to encourage people to take as much of your own power and exercise it without apps, but with the apps while you have them. But a good habit is to really pay very close attention to your own cycles. So just throwing that in there. Comes with age. So this question is for everybody. Thank you so much for, God, there's so much, I wish we had way more time. This is a question for everybody. Borrowing a phrase from David's scholarship, anti-abortion terrorism, can you all say something about how abortion providers can be protected both legally and by grassroots activists?
I can jump us off on that. One area that I think gets overlooked when thinking about safety for abortion providers and abortion access is local level legislative bodies. We've gotten very familiar with lobbying federal legislators about bills and laws relating to abortion, but there is the organization National Institute for Reproductive Health. And on their website, they have a few different guides for evaluating your city. What do protections for abortion and other reproductive health and justice issues look like on your city? What are the ordinances in place? Because the protesters, the harassers, they are wild. Prior to this role, I was working at the Planned Parenthood in Knoxville, and on New Year's Eve, our health center was burned down by an extremist. And I know in our city, we frequently begged police and any other authority to keep an eye on our clinic, to stop our protesters, to deter them in any way, and they would not. What I wish our city would have had would have been a buffer zone ordinance so that the protesters couldn't be as close to our clinic during the daytime. So our staff felt safer, and also as a way of deterring that energy, because these protesters, they feed off of these things that people think of as not that big of a deal, like protesting outside of a clinic, harassing patients and staff, yelling at them. This builds their energy, their fuel. So doing whatever we can so that they can't do that, like buffer zones, other ordinances. There's also been cities like Atlanta that have been establishing RJ commissions. Amplify Georgia is a great organization that's been doing work on that. But following those organizations to learn about what your city can do and how to put pressure on your city officials, because city, county, and school board officials, they don't actually hear from constituents that frequently. They're easy to get a hold of, meet with, and have your voice heard. So that is an opportunity to make change on a local level to protect people. And then on the state level, that is where we see the most abortion restrictions or protections as opposed to the federal government. The day-to-day impact on people getting care happens at the state level. So put pressure on officials, have your voice heard. And even though they're higher up in city council, I still talk to state legislators all the time who don't get a single call in a week from constituents. This is an area where your voice will be heard. I know it can feel very overwhelming, but these are some steps to dive in.
Excellent. Amy?
Yeah, I would echo what Max said. In Texas, we've been advocating for a bill that would allow for people that work in reproductive health rights or justice to be anonymous in any sort of public facing database. It hasn't gone anywhere, not surprising because we're in Texas, but they do have laws on the books, you know, through the comptroller and other other administrative offices where other, you know, demographics get to be anonymous, like, you know, prison guards and judges. And so we continue to hammer the point that reproductive health care and justice workers also need this protection, to no avail, but we still do it. And I think that's just important. Like what Max said, like we can affect change at the local level, and kind of taking a page out of the anti-abortion movement's playbook. We need to introduce the bills, even if they don't go anywhere, and introduce them over and over again so people understand that why they're necessary. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do. Some things I've done personally are creating a trust with a homestead exemption or a homestead exemption written in so that it can apply to my home address, other things like that. But it is unfortunate how harassing and what terrorist the anti-abortion movement can be. And I think people need to just be vigilant about what's going on in their surroundings.
Very important.
And the one thing I'll add, and I think Max touched on this earlier, is that people can volunteer to be escorts at their local clinic. You know, it's a really on the ground, concrete way for people to help out. And you're helping not just patients, but also the providers, the people who work at the clinic, get in and out of the clinic, because escorts sometimes are escorting not only the patient into the clinic, but also the workers. And that is a great barrier between the person trying to get in or out of the clinic and the protesters. And some of the protesters are, you know, non-threatening and non-abusive, and they don't confront, but a lot aren't. And a lot do confront, and a lot do harass, and they yell. And it's important to have people there who are just providing a buffer, a physical buffer between the person trying to enter the clinic and the harassing protester. That can make all the difference in terms of people's, you know, comfort level getting in and out of the clinic. And again, not just the patients, but also the people who work there. So escorting is just a great way for people who say, what can I do? What can I possibly do? Well, this is something you can do. And it's really important.
Yeah.
Can I just add a caveat to that?
Of course.
I will say we get a lot of people that want to get started in this movement and feel really passionately and want to protest the protesters at clinics. So I just want to make note that check in with your clinic to make sure that they're comfortable with clinic escorts. Many of them don't want like abortion rights protests happening at the clinic, because patients can't distinguish between like the good protesters and the bad protesters when they're just trying to access medical care. So I would just check in with the local people when you're signing up to be a clinic escorts. But the escort programs are amazing.
Yeah, some of the people who are the most vocal about not having abortion rights protest outside of clinics are the escorts, because the escorts are like, we're there to de-escalate everything. And so if there are abortion rights protesters, even though we share a mindset in terms of supporting the cause, the escorts don't want them, because the escort's only job is to help with medical care.
That's great. That's such great information and, and advice. It also reminds me, when we think about an escort, the stigma around getting an abortion is to kind of put that person at ease also. The guilt that people feel going in, they really need that support. So to be able to focus the attention on, as you said, the medical staff and on the person, the woman who is trying to get an abortion, to provide that comfort rather than being distracted by, a counter protest is truly important. So much, gosh. So this is another big picture question inspired by Amy's work with We Testify, a storytelling initiative dedicated to eliminating the stigma surrounding abortion. So panelists, could you please help us imagine a way to retell the story of abortion writ large, to come up with a narrative that reframes reproductive rights in ways that might resonate with people with more conservative values? In other words, how can we get abortion out of the crosshairs of the culture wars? I warned you it was a big picture question. Don't get silent on me now.
I can start.
Okay.
Some of the things that I think are so essential is just using the word abortion. It sounds really simple and people shy away from it and are afraid of the word, but abortion is a medical procedure. And when we're talking about abortion, let's not say women's health rights or reproductive health, because that encompasses so many other things. Abortion is what we're talking about, like when we're talking about abortion. So just use the word. At Avow, we use pro-abortion. And while that rubs people the wrong way, we believe that we are pro-abortion. We believe abortion should be accessible for anyone who wants or needs one. And we think abortion is about love for ourselves, love for our family, love for the lives we have potential to lead, love for the lives we have. And so I just encourage people to use the word abortion. And it sounds so simple, but it's so hard for so many people. But the more we use it, the more comfortable we get with it, right? My communications director told me a couple of years ago that the anti-abortion movement uses the word abortion 4 times more than our side does. And because they've framed the narrative around abortion, they've been able to perpetuate stigma and lies and inaccuracies. So we have to take the word back. And I think that that's like one of the first and easiest things we can do to create the world we envision, because once it becomes so normalized, abortion will just be another piece of healthcare that we need access to. So that's one of the first things I would say. And then the second thing is just talking about it, like why you support it from a values-based perspective, from your experience, from the experience of people, that you love and care about. Because I think that at the end of the day, we can all agree on our humanity. And if we start from this point of talking about why we believe people should have access to abortion care, we can get people there. We just have to not be afraid to have the conversation. And we have to just do it within our community. I think that's one of the most effective ways to advocate for abortion rights.
I love that so much, everything you said, because I feel sometimes like it's our own movement that tends to hold us back in the culture wars side of things. I talk to people a lot. I've done a lot of trainings on how to talk about abortion the past 10 or so years. And I talk to a lot of people who are, I am pro-choice, but I would never do that. I just want other people to have the option. And every time I kind of say to them, I'm like, why do you feel such a need to point out that you and I are different people, that you and I would make different decisions, that you're not like me? And they always kind of look at me like, oh no, I didn't, I just want people to know that I would never do that. And I'm like, why? No one asked you to. You don't have any data or evidence to say that helps the argument. And that's what I say to people in a gentle way. And it kind of opens up something to think about how we've told ourselves there's a very certain way we have to talk about this issue, but we don't actually know why. Like I'm a data nerd, so it's also part of it, but I'm like, there's no statistics or evidence that saying abortion shouldn't be used as birth control or the word rare or anything like that helps. We've just started doing that. And I kind of wonder, is that because what the right has led us to believe? They've framed this narrative, as Amy said, and we've followed it. We have to think bigger. We have to be blunt and bold. I talk to people every single day who have no idea that abortion is going to become illegal in Tennessee this year. They don't believe me. They also don't even know what Roe v. Wade is. And how we get to this point of people being confused and not believing the future we're about to go into is when we use euphemisms and we're vague, or even when we say Roe, when we mean to say abortion, when we say Roe is falling, Roe is in danger, when we mean to say abortion is in danger. We have to be very, very clear. And also it saves times when you get right to the point of saying abortion as opposed to women's complicated healthcare decisions, speeds up that sentence real quick.
I would also add that choice implies that people have a choice, and so many marginalized communities do not have the choice to access abortion care. Like in Texas, you know, people of color, trans, non-binary people, immigrants, undocumented people, they don't actually have a choice because there are so few clinics in Texas, or they can't afford the travel, or they can't afford the childcare, or whatever the obstacle is. And we have a lot in Texas. Like, it isn't a choice. They're actually not afforded the choice that a lot of privileged people are. So pro-choice is just an inaccurate term.
Yeah, just say what you mean. And I think for like, what can people do? What does shifting culture look like? It means saying that. It means posting on social media, I support people who have abortions. I love people who have abortions. If you ever don't know what to do when you're pregnant, you want to talk through your options, come to me. If you want someone to hold your hand, come to me. We need to take care of each other. People need to know who in their lives are going to be a safe person to talk to for figuring out access and for emotional support. When I started doing abortion storytelling, every single person I talked to who'd had an abortion felt a need to tell me why and to justify their decision despite the fact that I didn't ask them. And most people I talked to said, I felt bad that I didn't feel bad. Stigma is so ingrained in us, and it would have such a huge impact on everyone's mental health, emotional health, ability to advocate for abortion loud and proud if we all could show each other that we do have that love and support for people who have abortions.
Absolutely. David?
I think here, I mean, everything Amy and Max said is so poignant and perfect. The only thing I'll add is there's this really wonderful study called the Turnaway Study that I think it has some of the most, for people who want evidence, has some of the best evidence about the importance of abortion. The Turnaway Study followed almost 1,000 people over 5 years and looked at a group of people who were able to get abortions and people who were not able to get abortions. And what they found is that people who wanted abortion but were not able to. And what they found was that people who were not able to get an abortion but did want one were worse off in almost every measure in their life over the course of 5 years. And this is where I was talking before about physical health and mental health and their children's health and their career aspirations and their employment and their staying with an abusive partner. And I could go on. It really shows just how important it is for someone to be able to control their reproductive lives. And the devastating impact it has on someone when they're not able to control their reproduction. And, you know, even if the Turnaway Study didn't exist, all of us would still feel strongly about this as a matter of principle. But with the Turnaway study, we can say principle, values, and also look at these terrible effects. And so for people who want to know that part of the story, we have the proof. So I encourage everyone to check out that information in more detail, because we have the proof of just what a horrible thing it is when people aren't able to control their reproduction.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. How are you doing on time? We want to honor your time here. Just, can cut past a couple of questions over here, or how are you doing? Checking in with you now. You're okay? Dave, okay, great. Let's close on, and at least on an empowered and an even hopeful note, if you will. I noticed that Max Carwile posted the following Angela Davis quotation on her civic engagement page online. "You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time." Angela Davis. With this in mind, could you please speak to the feeling of helplessness, even defeatism, so many people feel in the face of what's going on these days? How can we resurrect a civil rights era level of belief in the power of the people? You want to start? David, why don't we start with you?
I think we will see a reinvigoration of a large number of people who have taken this for granted for 49 years. That people are going to realize that now is the time for action, not for just accepting defeat, right? Like, you look at the anti-abortion movement, they didn't accept defeat. They have been working since the day Roe was decided to overturn Roe, and they've had a lot of losses. There's no doubt about it, right? The past 49 years has not been a steady trajectory for them right to Dobbs, and now they're going to win. They've had a lot of really disappointing losses from their perspective, and yet they've kept battling. They've kept, as Amy said, introducing bills they know aren't going to go anywhere, because they hope, and they've been successful, eventually getting those bills so they're not only introduced, but they're voted upon, and then that loses, but now they're voted upon and now they win, but they get a veto, but now they've voted upon, they win, and they get the governor to sign it, because they know that, or they knew that this was a long haul struggle. And I'm hoping that whatever happens with Dobbs is not a 49-year struggle to overturn. I'm hoping it's the 2-year struggle to overturn, that we can make progress more quickly. But whatever length of time it is going to be a struggle, and we need to be fighting that battle from the moment. We need to be fighting that battle now. We need to be fighting that battle 10 years ago, and everyone here has been doing that. But we need to, whatever happens, look at this as an invitation to continue the fight, deal with losses that are going to be devastating and are going to be harmful to people, but continue, because we have to push forward and win. We have to be creative. We have to hold politicians accountable to not just get into office by getting the pro-choice, pro-abortion, abortion rights vote, but also to act accordingly, and encourage them to be creative and to not just worry. I worry sometimes that Democrats who support abortion rights are too worried that they're not doing the right thing or the thing that's going to work, so they don't do anything. Whereas the other side for decades has just been doing anything and figuring maybe something will work. We have to be in the mindset of doing anything and being creative and trying and dealing with the fact a lot of them aren't going to work, but hopefully planting the seeds for something that will work. Because we have no idea what the next election is going to bring. We have no idea what the next year is going to bring in terms of Supreme Court justices, and we have to be ready for when we have the opportunity, because the other side sure was. They had no, they in their wildest dreams, I don't think they thought they were going to get 3 Supreme Court justices in President Trump's 4 years. But they did. And, look, are we necessarily going to get an opportunity like that in the near future? No, but we might, and we have to be ready for it. And victory can come in the future. It will come in the future, and we have to work for it and be ready for that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you.
I would just add that we give the young people and the next generations a platform. We listen to them. We help them on their journey to become advocates. Last year, I was devastated from about March when SB 8 was introduced, and we sounded the alarm and no one listened, to when it got signed into law. But then a 12-year-old girl emailed me and wanted to throw a rally for all her friends at the Capitol, and they did. And they had 10 speakers that were 18 and under. The majority were 12 years old, and they spoke unapologetically about their support of abortion. They spoke about why it matters to them at 12 and their generation. And they've been continuing to be advocates the past year. One of them is actually going to speak at the rally on Saturday, because I love her and she's so inspiring and she's just relentless. And I think that a lot of times we dismiss the younger generations as not understanding or not having lived through the fight. And the fact of the matter is they're inheriting this, and we weren't able to assure these rights for them. And so we need to give them the tools and the platforms and just elevate their voices. There's a book called What's an Abortion Anyways, which I got. It's for children, and my kids already know what I do. I'm not exactly sure they understand what an abortion is, but they've known for a long time what I do. But I would just encourage to talk to everybody about it. It sounds so simple or easy, but sometimes it's hard to talk about abortion, and sometimes kids especially don't understand it. But a couple of years ago, my eldest, for a nonprofit day, created his pretend nonprofit that advocated for education for kids around the world, because he was like, you do good in the world, I want to do good in the world. And so I think it's so important to just nurture those inclinations of our children and the young people and just give them a voice and a platform, because I have so much faith in this new generation. In Texas, I think there were protests all across Austin yesterday in high schools where they walked out for 49 minutes because of the impending decision. I'm just always surprised at how much energy they have and how willing they are to just unapologetically advocate for what's right. I'm also exhausted, and I think they need to take over. So I'm waiting for that day. Yeah.
You mentioned the bill, what was it, SB 8, did you say? Can you just, share with the audience what exactly that bill is kind of quickly?
Sure. SB 8 is a ban on abortion after 6 weeks. And it allows anyone to sue anyone that they think is providing or aiding and abetting abortion access. And it's been law for over 8 months in Texas, essentially banning the majority of abortions. About 85 to 90% of the abortions in Texas happen after 6 weeks. So those people have been forced to travel out of state or, continue their pregnancy against their wishes. And it's been pretty devastating for Texans seeking abortion care. It's highly unconstitutional, but it's remained in effect. And it's been pretty horrific. I think it's kind of a glimpse of what's to come in a couple months for half the states in Texas, except for it'll be worse. I mean, half the states in the United States, but it's going to be worse. So
yeah, that brings us back to the point that when David was speaking before about people needing babysitters and all of what goes into, a woman having to travel. So just think about that particular law being passed in all of our states, where if we want to be supportive for a woman who needs to travel for an abortion, that our own freedom is literally at stake as well, at whatever level that is. That's why I wanted you to kind of break it down a little bit. So thank you for that. Max?
Yeah, I think what's really important right now for moving forward is for everyone to figure out what specifically they as an individual can do and plug into. I think sometimes we get overwhelmed with what should we all be doing? And we need to break it down of what is your actual capacity? Like, a lot of people want to be clinic escorts, but making sure that you can actually commit to be there every week or at least once per month or whatever that escort group asks, so that it's not kind of overwhelming groups with doing trainings when it doesn't deliver. Like, know your boundaries. If you work for a hotel or a hotel company, see if they can offer like a flat fixed rate for abortion funds who need to place patients. Like, honestly, these random things are what takes up so much time for funds. Is like, what is the rate for that hotel going to be on that specific day? Like, these are very minor things that can make a huge difference. Like, do you work for a daycare, anyone who provides childcare, that you can figure out getting a reduced rate for abortion patients, since we know 59% of people who have an abortion have already been pregnant at least once, have already given birth at least once. A lot are parents. It means figuring out who is in your community who needs support. If your abortion fund doesn't need volunteers, get your friends together to fundraise for them. I know that not everyone has money. If you only have $5 to give, but you can find 10 other people who have $5 to give, it adds up. We can all find an individual role in this movement in a way to plug in. And sometimes that means just letting people in your life know you will be there for them. You are a resource. And it means even the people who right now think that they are against abortion. People never know when they are going to need abortion care or to help someone else with obtaining an abortion. I definitely never anticipated that the first time I would ever have sex, the condom would break and Plan B would fail me and I would need an abortion. You can't predict this. So be prepared and be thinking about how to get everyone else prepared. Even if it is sticky and uncomfortable and rough at first, you never know when you've made an impact. Even if you're in a Facebook debate and you feel awful, you never know who else saw your comments and walked away with a bit more information that day. This fight is hard. I am not going to pretend it is going to feel great and easy all the time. And if you're getting into this movement because you want to feel good, maybe think through that a little bit. Think through what you want to get out of it. Maybe prepare for how it can feel hard, it can feel upsetting. But I know what always invigorates me is being around other people who care about abortion and who love abortion. Being in these spaces together is incredibly fulfilling and brings me joy. So think about that. Think about how to take care of yourself and how to think about what is your role.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, what a powerful, powerful panel. You guys are just amazing. Any final thoughts that you'd like to share before we release you into the wild?
I mean, I think we've touched on it, but for people with means, if you have money, donate your money. The money that you can part with is very valuable to people who don't have it and to the funds and organizations that need it. We've mentioned a bunch of them already, but the National Network of Abortion Funds has a list. You can look at your own, you can donate to them, or you can look at a list of the local funds in your state and your local region that are going to need your resources. I mean, here in Philadelphia, for instance, we have, I think, the largest local fund in the country, but it still needs a ton more money to help all the patients that need the money in Philadelphia. Abortion funds need money. And for people who have money, that is a wonderful way to really make a difference in someone's life. I would strongly encourage people to donate locally and not nationally. The national organizations do wonderful work and I support them. I'm a part of them. I work with them, but they usually get a ton of money after bad news like what we're about to get. It's the local organizations that need the money and are going to use it on the grounds in ways that are directly connected to the community where people are. So I'd strongly encourage people to do that. And then we haven't talked about it much because it feels futile sometimes, but you absolutely do have to vote. In every election, every primary, every local election, if you're not voting at every opportunity you have to vote, you're doing it wrong. And you have to do it right at this point in time, even though obviously it feels frustrating when you vote for people who don't do the things you want them to do. It absolutely feels frustrating, but it's still better than getting the anti-abortion person into office. And so that is essential for this work. So there's all sorts of ways to be actively involved, but voting that, that 2-second thing that you do, obviously you can wait in line for it, but that flick of the button, that makes a huge difference. And writing that check or that credit card payment.
And I know everybody is smart enough that's on and watching to know that the vote is important, but most definitely check into the history, the record, the voting record of the people that you plan to vote for. If they've been making a lot of promises and not delivering on those promises, then maybe you want to reconsider who you're going to cast that vote for, because it's so important to not have the others, the conservatives, in power in our local communities, obviously, where everything will be stripped away eventually. But it's also about not doing this thing blindly. So it requires a bit of research. And I think that so many times we kind of, get swept up in all of the pamphlets that come along, and the campaigning on what we will do when we haven't seen any evidence, quite frankly, that they've done so in the past. So,
or run for office. We need people who care about this issue, who are watching an event like this, running for office and getting into office.
And therein back to the money, because it costs money to run for office, right? So, but it's really important. Thank you all so very much for being a part of this. And we look forward to, learning. I certainly look forward to learning more about the work that you're doing. This has been an honor and a privilege. So thank you so much, and enjoy your day, what's left of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.